Marshall because of him being the first African American to the Supreme Court, Justice of the Supreme Court.
So it would be Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey started a movement called Pan-Africanism when it just made our people proud to be black. And so I think that it had a big influence on teaching black people that they are powerful and that they are important and that they are great. So.
For me, it would be Harriet Tubman. It's a person that I talk about in class a lot, so she's kind of one of my, as far as the 10th grade U.S. history that I teach, one of my idols. In comparison to other black folks in history, the fact that she escaped slavery and continued to go back time and time again, risking her life over and over again so that the other people have the opportunity for freedom as well. She's definitely one of my idols, for sure.
I would choose Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali, the stuff that he stood for, he didn't let nobody change his mind about it. Even though it was hard for him to do, even with the jail behind it, he still stood on his belief and stayed that way and then spread what he believed to other people. So I think if I had to meet anybody, it would be him.
I think the go-to answer is Dr. King because I think with his death, it was such a blow to the black communities that and it's so sad that he never got to see his vision completed, although you could argue that it's still not complete today. I think he would be the most obvious answer, but I would like to meet Benjamin Banneker, because he was just a really interesting fellow he came from slaves, and he was really well educated in a time period where that wasn't really kind of a thing, especially amongst African Americans. And I would just love to know about what struggles he had, how he was embraced in black communities as well as in white communities, and really if he was even taken serious as an academic, especially amongst white voices. I think that would be a really interesting conversation to have with him. If you're not familiar with him, I would definitely look him up, because he wrote a really interesting letter to Thomas Jefferson, and then Thomas Jefferson wrote a very interesting rebuttal back to him. That's how I figured out, that's how I knew who Banneker was in the first place. I had encountered that.
I think that I would have to say Rosa Parks.
The fact that he won the case of Brown versus Board of Education to segregate the schools.
Probably his Pan-Africanism and just his views, and he believed that black people could survive on their own, that they could start their own everything, and because of that, it's made a lot of African Americans very conscious and very awake when it comes to black history and things like that. So he just was really all about the empowerment of African Americans and just seeing them do well and succeed and do big things in the world.
Just, I mean, her tenacity, her character, I mean, her perseverance. You have somebody that finally tasted freedom, finally knew what that felt like, finally was able to take a sigh of relief, I suppose, and then she turned around and risked it all over and over and over and over again, just so that other people could have that same feeling. So, I mean, I think that speaks a lot to who she was.
I think it's boxing, because back then they didn't really let African Americans, box. So I think that by him showing, standing for what he believed in and going through the whole process of boxing, and when they didn't really want black people boxing, I think that was very influential to other kids, that maybe want to do the same thing. So I think that was pretty cool.
For Banneker, I think it's just because of how educated he was of the time, because we have this perception in America that especially back in Thomas Jefferson's day, that if they were black, then they were slaves. And it turns out that was not always the case. And I think that would just be really interesting to kind of just map and see what schools did they go to, what issues they had to face as they were trying to get their education, where their families ended up, how much harassment they got, because you don't hear those stories near as much. Thomas Jefferson is who we hear about the absolute most in a time period like that. And I think there's a lot of voices in that time period that are not represented in the way that they should be, historically speaking, especially within black communities.
not only the stance that she took on the bus, but also the stance that she took for other African Americans after that, because she made several appearances and she was involved in several different programs and activities for African Americans, making sure that they had the proper education, making sure that they were recognized for the good that they did. And she was also very invested in children, which is something that people don't really do.
I think the fact that the schools are, once I said, segregated, no opportunity to better education for everyone, has helped society as a whole.
He made people start to realize, black people especially, how wonderful we are. And I think that that's what we need, especially in like today's time, because we got a lot of outside things making it seem like that we're not wonderful or that we're not as powerful as other people. And I think that his movement helped people to realize how powerful and wonderful we are.
How she's impacted society in general, man. I mean, it's a never give up type of attitude. I mean, it's a never ending type of spirit where you just say, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do, you know, more than anything else. Not because it's safe, not because it's easy, but because it's right. And I mean, to have that mindset, I think definitely can do nothing but move you forward.
It impacts society because now that you pretty much can do whatever you want to do in life, you know, he started the ground, so all the boxers now are standing on his shoulders with other people that are boxers. So I think you have to stand for something or fall for anything. So.
I'll be honest, I don't know enough about Banneker to be able to say about a more modern time. I could definitely, of course, talk about Dr. King and his message. You know, everybody talks about his I Have a Dream speech, but I read his autobiography, and what was really interesting in there was it was full of his diaries and some of his speeches that are very lesser known, and especially for him, right before he was assassinated, he wasn't talking about equality of race, he was talking about equality of money. And so a lot of people don't realize that, but if you actually look at the day before he was assassinated, where he was, what he was speaking about. And so I think the influence that we see, especially for him, is that he was not just a man who believed in equality of all people in the sense of race, but he also really meant it in relation to money. And that's not a conversation that a lot of people feel comfortable talking about. And I think that I think that's still true today, and I think you'd be really disheartened to see that that is still true today, because you start talking about people and money, and you'll see that, that tends to get hackles up maybe a little bit more than it does with race.
I think that it taught society that just because you make a mark in history doesn't mean that you stop making your mark in life.